One of the most perplexing things about being human, in my personal opinion, is how we just collectively accept that our cognition is what it is and we never question it. Why we feel attraction to some and not others. Why we have certain programming or emotional scripts, behavioral knee jerk reactions, the very foundation of personality. Well, that's just our archetype. That's just it. That's who we are. The questions that I've had about transhumanism, particularly in the applications of ethical transhumanism, is what does it functionally look like? Right? It's beyond living to eternity. I'm not so sure I'm up for that anyway. Even in this life cycle, it feels ad nauseum boring sometimes. I'm sure there's always things to stimulate ourselves with and entertain ourselves and distractions galore. But once you start to see the repetition of the patterns, it is discernible that it just keeps going on and on and on. And so, functionally speaking, my view for transhumanism is specifically tied to upgrading and modding out cognition. And here's what I mean by this. Shortly after I gave birth, I noticed that there was this new installation of some sort of thought program function, perhaps is a better way to say it, where if I didn't look at my baby, particularly when they started crawling around, it kicked in when they started crawling around, within a certain amount of time, like a certain amount of seconds, like 30 seconds, then I would have this nagging feeling within. And if I made eye contact with my baby, or even if I just made sure that they were safe, then I felt relief. But it was a very discernible function in my cognition, that an impulse that would drive me to look at her at a certain interval. And I found that so fascinating. It completely took me by surprise as somebody who has spent a great deal of time, years now, really trying to understand my metacognition, because I find it very interesting, my internal world, the processes and how everything connects together. And then to be able to articulate that to help people master their own metacognition is something that I take a lot of joy in. So to have a new installation without my awareness, without my knowledge, without my consent, although I'm happy about it, there's no complaints, I was really surprised. Similarly, when I was reality shifting, this is what I call it. This is what I've called it before. I realized that there was an entire genre on social media about it. I was in the dark, in isolation, doing this. I also called it quantum traveling and quantum shifting. I had no vocabulary for this, no exposure to these concepts. Literally, I was doing this before the advent of TikTok. And I was in a social media break, so I wasn't being educated on this and then fit my experience into a framework that was given to me. That's very important. I came up with this in parallel and tandem on my own, while connected to these higher consciousness states. So it wasn't like I created it. These words and concepts came to me almost like from the morphogenic field, so to speak, metaphorically speaking. So when I was undergoing those experiences, what I observed is that my cognition did not like to break a predicted sequence. And what I also found is that the linearity to space and time was tied to some function in the brain. Similar to this interval of me checking in on my baby, there was this interval of my eyes going to the clock. If you notice yourself, if you watch yourself for a day, especially if you have a lot of meetings, you will find this to be true. There is some interval, like an NTP server, that is pinging your clocks and where you're at spatially. It's fascinating. And breaking this is possible, but is highly challenging. And there seems to be a degree of inter-user variability. So some people are more precise than others. Like some people can tell you where they're at in space and time down to almost the degree or the second. And others, unsurprisingly, those that are undergoing a quote spiritual awakening, often make jokes about losing this feature of their cognition. Almost as though something shifts internally where they're no longer tied to space and time. This actually prevents us from smoothly transitioning to another world, another dimension, or another matrix, unless these worlds and dimensions and matrices are stacked on top of each other with a high degree of fidelity, such that the person can slip in and out without much awareness. And this is what I believe things like the Mandela effect are. All hypotheses, of course. And so when there is a high degree of convergence between dimension A and dimension B, with a slight degree of change, then the person is unaware that they are shifting into another, quote, reality layer or another matrix. And this actually, I believe, is a security issue. It's a vulnerability. And this is something that I would want to address with the application of transhumanism. Why do we have features of our cognition that we don't have fully mapped out, that are not fully under our purview? I mean, we talk about being sovereign beings. What does that mean? You get to choose what store you go to? I mean, come on, people. Like, what are we talking about here? To like really be sovereign, in my personal opinion, means you have the ability to completely design who you are. Why would you ever have an attraction to something detrimental or an addiction? Right? Why? Because somebody told you had to have it? Okay. But we can just pretend that we're sovereign. So when we understand the thought modules that our brains are doing, then that gives us the latitude for which to build ourselves. And that's what I believe the power of transhumanism is upgrading the tech of humanity, upgrading the cognition, removing the bugs, doing updates, and being cognizant of that. But then again, I have an alternative viewpoint about that, in that I believe that the satiation of individuals that are perpetually demonstrating lower sentience and zero interest in self-mastery or discovery, and are virtually NPCs or placeholders, I'm actually glad that there are systems of distraction that keep them occupied. I'm glad that there's the adult film industry, because it keeps a lot of people out of the procreation cycle. And when they go very deep into it, they stop wanting to mate and stop wanting to connect at a deep, intimate level. And when you really start to do an examination of their relationship skills, it actually, in some cases, not all, is to everybody's benefit. Because some of those candidates are not capable of building healthy relationships. So it keeps the unqualified ones busy, I find, personally. But there was also a time that I didn't think that that mattered and that the creation energy could just be expended without any consequence. And when we understand what manifestation and creation is all about, I think it behooves us to carefully select for those that have the collective's best interest in mind. And usually, I find that those that are addicted to anything actually struggle with those higher level Maslowian concepts. I mean, it's safe to say that if somebody is holed up in the bathroom at work, obsessively checking that porn site, watching car commercials, and cycling in between the two, they're probably not really focused on being self-actualized, finding their purpose and their mission in the world. And so it reduces their level of impact, scope, and ability because all of their seed is spent towards mirages and two-dimensional illusions and cycles of entrapment, consciousness traps. So I actually find it to be a beautiful system of selecting for those that see past the illusions and understand the value of their creation energy and the power that they have. And self-selecting a pool of those people that utilize that power and creation energy in intelligent and meaningful ways, I think is a better harnessing of it than perhaps the alternative. And another counterpoint is, do we really want to let toddlers with guns be fully sovereign? Right? If they have the power to destroy worlds and dimensions and neighboring societies just for an emotional experience that they're having, that's based on a perceptual experience that is wired to a subconscious program that wasn't even put there by them, that they believe and fully adhere to in the name of sovereignty. They fight to the bitter end for this illusion of where they're at in this time point with devastating consequences to major groups of people and planets and organizations and economies of scale, I mean, let's think about it for a moment. Do we really want to let them be sovereign? Luke, you killed my father. Oh, here we go again. It's another intergalactic war. Because, okay. Why? Okay, yes, of course. We don't want anybody's fathers getting killed. Of course not. I mean, the next thing you know, the Jehovah's Witnesses are going to wage war on the Italian Catholics in New York, and we're going to all slip into a black hole because somebody takes over, hacks CERN, and we all just go kaputs. So much destruction for so much emotion, which is so temporary and subject to the filter of the perceptual lenses that we happen to be wearing at any given point of our cycle of maturity and awakening. It reminds me of today when I was pulling gum off of my toddler's shoe and very annoyed by the whole prospect of it and why somebody leaves gum on the ground these days. It's just a thing. And we were at the park and it was probably a kid. And I remember when I used to do things like that because I didn't understand how my actions were impacting others. And this seems to be par for the course of the cycle of awakening that as we gain different levels of consciousness, or as Maslow said, self realization or self actualization, we start to appreciate how our actions emanate outwards in a ripple effect. And we care a lot more than we did at lower states of immaturity or vibration. And so to think about giving immature beings high levels of sovereignty, domination, control, before those cycles have been fully played out for them to ascend beyond, I think just opens up a recipe for disaster, which is why I start this playlist with a little bit of caution that when we talk about modulating human technologies, I think we need to be very careful about our impact and how it is applied, and that we need to be very selective in how it is used, because there could be devastating consequences. And that's why I believe that there needs to be an ethics board, an unbiased one that doesn't slow things down, but that can actually discuss these features of humanity and really to make the mod packaging as open source as possible, but to do so with a collective's interest in mind, with a wide range of perspectives that are represented. And I don't mean corrupted ones and, all the naysayers, like there is a way to do it right. There is a way to do it right. And we need people to strategize what that is more than just relent to everything's broken, because that is the powerlessness position that doesn't actually serve the collective in the long run. It does raise awareness. It is important to be mindful of how things are corrupted or not functioning properly. We need to understand what is broken in order to understand how to fix it. But very often I find that the conversation is dominated on the fear and it's broken versus the how to fix it. So speaking of how to fix it, if we want to advance humans to the next level, I believe that there needs to be upgrades and tinkering with the cognitive modules. First, I believe that this needs to be thoroughly mapped out. It probably has been in some basement in the military. Hi, guys and gals, and not otherwise specified. And then there needs to be a selective pruning after each feature is understood. So, for example, if we want to be able to shift into another matrix, one that perhaps isn't eating itself alive, then I believe that we need to either have the parent matrix be very, very close to the child matrix, or I believe that there needs to be a disruption in this space-time centering function, or the pinging function, depending on how you want to look at it, in order to shift people. And then there needs to be an anchoring, and probably a combination of all of these, an anchoring back into the space-time orientation. But the problem is, and I've experimented quite a bit, is that when we are in the beta wave brain state, this is my opinion, This makes it almost impossible to break the space-time orientation module without complete disorientation, discomfort, and what seems to be a peripheral nervous system reaction. So adrenaline will be released. I've observed this countless times in many different arrangements, that when I actually started to shift into another world, meaning the sensory information that I was perceiving started to morph into a different environment substantially, it caused a reversal of that effect due to what I believe is the fear reaction and the strong sense of disorientation and discomfort that arose from making that shift. I also found that when the world that I was trying to shift into was not as dissimilar from the world that I was coming from, but I could discern differences, I had a hard time anchoring into the new one, almost as though there was an overwrite function. And I'm happy to go more into this, but what I believe is more essential right now is to really lay down the framework that our internal world and our thought structures should be completely known by us. And if they're not, we need to get on that ASAP. And if they are, then that's where I believe that transhumanism can shine for the benefit of the collective.